begging his lord to return before things spiraled even further out of control. The scene shifts back to Earth, where the beaten guy started making noise again. He barked at Mu, warning him once more that his boxer cousin is going to make him pay for what he did to him. Hyung, the so-called boxer cousin, was intrigued. He couldn't help but be a little impressed by how fast Mu had moved and punched earlier. Curious, he asked if Mu practiced any sports, like martial arts, but Mu casually replied that he didn't play any sports, because all he wanted was to fight, not play. Mu's response, however, made Hyung think of him as nothing more than an overconfident, dumb middle schooler. Spitting out his chewing gum with a smirk, Hyung took a fighting stance and said he was ready to fight, just as Mu had apparently wanted. Hyung decided to start first, moving quickly to test this guy and see if he was all talk or actually had some skill. His opening strike was fast and sharp, landing hard on Mu's face before Mu could dodge or block. But despite the satisfaction of landing the first blow, something about Mu stunned Hyung. There was something strange, something downright unusual about this opponent, and it sent a chill running up his spine. As an experienced boxer who carefully observes his opponent's movements, Hyung found it strange that Mu didn't move an inch, even when he had clearly been watching the punch coming from the start. Just like the beaten guy who had hired him, Hyung had no idea that his opponent wasn't human, but a god. And not just any god, a god who was absolutely obsessed with fighting. What Hyung also didn't know was that Mu never dodged a preemptive strike. For him, taking the first hit was like a signal, confirming that the battle had officially begun. With his usual unsettling, overly excited grin, Mu suddenly shouted, "Is hand-to-hand combat your favorite thing?" His creepy smile and strange behavior made Hyung wonder if this guy was just some crazy teenager. Then, out of nowhere, Mu mimicked Hyung's fighting stance and launched himself forward. Hyung didn't take it seriously at all, thinking it was just a dumb copycat move. When Mu threw a punch, Hyung blocked it with his hand effortlessly, or so he thought. The force behind Mu's punch sent Hyung sliding backward, surprising him completely. His hand throbbed in pain from underestimating his opponent's strength. He couldn't believe how much power this seemingly weak and scrawny guy had. Meanwhile, Mu looked even more thrilled. His face lit up with excitement as he realized his attack had worked perfectly, just by copying what Hyung had done earlier. There was one thing Mu had to take into account. His current body wasn't something he could rely on just yet. When he tensed his muscles as hard as he could at the moment of impact, the strain left his arm muscles screaming in pain, like they wanted to quit and take a break. Of course, Mu didn't care about the state of his muscles or how much they were suffering. In fact, the more pain he endured, the more he enjoyed the fight. For him, it only made the battle even more satisfying. The thrill of this fight couldn't even compare to the feeling of battling creatures in his godly form. It was raw and exhilarating in a completely different way. Suddenly, to Hyung's surprise, Mu pulled off his belt and wrapped it around his fist. The fact that his current fragile body could cause trouble for him, especially since recovery and healing would take significantly longer, pushed him to come up with this idea. The beaten guy, still watching from the sidelines, thought using a belt made the fight unfair. But neither Mu nor Hyung cared about his opinion. Hyung rushed forward again, this time fully aware that he couldn't afford to underestimate Mu. He started throwing punches, left, right, one after another, trying to overwhelm him with speed and power. Mu managed to block most of the incoming strikes, but even so, he found himself in a pretty rough situation. His movements were limited by the pain in his body, and Hyung's attacks were relentless. In the middle of defending himself, Mu started analyzing his opponent's movements, only to realize they were fast and precise, but way too predictable. Just by observing Hyung's fighting style, Mu quickly began to anticipate his every move. At first, it was hard to figure out, but less than a minute into the fight, Mu was already dodging Hyung's attacks with ease. And if that wasn't enough, when Hyung tried to catch him off guard with a different move, Mu not only blocked the attack but also turned the tables by punching his arm mid-swing. It only took seconds for Hyung to process what had just happened and how his arm ended up broken. He began screaming as the shock wore off and the pain set in. Mu watched him silently, almost amused by the way Hyung reacted. The screaming made Mu wonder if Hyung and that guy from Lee's class were really cousins or something, as they seemed to share the same overly dramatic tendencies. Mu didn't waste much time though. He sealed his victory with another sudden punch to the distracted Hyung, knocking him out cold for a little while. The sight left his friend, or cousin, or whoever he was, completely stunned. Things went from bad to worse for him as Mu's face shifted into a scary, excited expression, practically radiating his eagerness to fight. He declared it was time to pay for all the trouble caused, especially since this wasn't the first time they'd messed with him. The once bully, the guy who had been so arrogant earlier, knew in that moment that with Hayoung out of the picture, there was no one left to save him. He had no doubt that a painful fate awaited him now, and there was no escaping it. Mu slowly walked toward Lee's classmate to settle things for the day. As he got closer to the beaten-up guy, Mu noticed that the guy had no intention or will to fight back, and so there was no joy or honor in beating up someone acting so scared. The beaten-up guy, for a moment, noticed Mu's hesitation and thought that if he kept acting this way and just admitted he didn't want to fight anymore, everything might end peacefully. But it was too late to play the victim now. Before he even had the chance to say anything, Mu punched him in the face in one quick move. After all, this was the same guy who had started today's fight by throwing that small stone and bringing a boxer to take Mu down. He couldn't back out now, and even if he wanted to, Mu already had more than enough reason to beat him again. As expected, Mu didn't show a shred of mercy and kept hitting the guy however he wanted, testing out his new copied fighting techniques on his opponent's body one after another. Even as the guy's face and body were covered in bruises and blood, Mu wasn't satisfied. He finished it off with one final brutal knee strike straight to the guy's already battered face. After putting all his strength into making this an unforgettable day for that guy, Mu finally felt satisfied. He wondered, with a mocking tone in his mind, why the guy wouldn't just admit defeat, but deep down, Mu knew he hadn't given the poor guy even the slightest chance to do so. After finishing with both of them, Mu walked away, knowing he had other things to take care of. Not to mention, like all his previous opponents, he left his mark on that boxer and added him to his growing list of playthings. The beaten-up bully, on the other hand, after learning his painful lesson, was muttering Lee's name under his breath, calling him a crazy bastard. It wasn't long before Mu returned to Lee's house. Sitting on his bed, he felt great knowing everything was going exactly as he wanted, and he could enjoy fighting almost every day. However, just like before, his weak muscles and fragile bones that often gave him trouble, even breaking easily while defending himself, were annoying and a bit concerning. Still, in order to hold on to this feeling, a mix of fighting opponents stronger than him and experiencing the pain and recovery throughout his body, Mu decided he would do whatever it took. He decided to return to the God Realm first to see what was going on there and to get what he had asked the Dragonling to prepare for him. Like always, he focused and, while sitting, tried to leave Lee's body and return to his original form. But this time, unlike before when his soul would transfer instantly, several seconds passed and nothing happened. Mu slowly opened his eyes and squinted, glancing around, only to realize he was still in Lee's house. He couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't return to his body in the God Realm. The reason for this incident went back to a few days ago in Lucifer's domain. That was when Mu had forcefully thrown Lee onto Elmer's planet without Lucifer's permission. As we already know, in that day, Mu had completely ignored Lucifer and, without caring about his opinion, came and went as he pleased, unaware that his actions were pushing Lucifer to his limits. On his way back to his domain that day, the Dragonling had asked Mu about his journey to Earth. Mu explained how much he enjoyed it, but also mentioned the weakness of his new body. During that conversation, Mu had ordered his assistant to find a recovery magic orb for him while he was gone, hoping it would help his weak body on Earth recover faster. There was just one small problem. Magical items were common on Elmer and a few other planets under Lucifer's control. They were abundant in those worlds because of the plentiful mana there. Unlike Earth, where magical items and objects can only be obtained through divine blessings or whims, they are incredibly rare. Because of that, only a handful of people throughout human history have been able to use them. Naturally, those who could were often regarded as godlike beings by humans. Not long after, Mu arrived at his domain, where the Dragonling had promised to find a recovery magic orb for him the next time he returned to the God Realm. When Mu got off the dragon, his assistant reminded him once again about the upcoming gods meeting. That's when Mu casually searched in his pants, saying he had prepared something for him because of all the complaining. To the assistant's disbelief, it wasn't anything grand, just a small letter, and of course we already know what's written inside it. After delivering his message and doing what he considered his responsibility, Mu approached the miniature Earth model and placed his hand on its surface again to return to Lee's body. The Dragonling, clearly annoyed, angrily tried to convince him to at least wait and attend the meeting before leaving. But all the complaints fell on deaf ears as Mu completely ignored him, just like before, and transferred his soul back to Earth. Unbeknownst to both of them, a small demon hovered in the sky, silently observing and reporting every move to Mu's greatest enemy. The scene shifted back to the present, where Lucifer was analyzing the situation. He had no idea what Mu was up to, but he was certain his body was now empty of a soul. The fact that Mu hadn't shown up for the meeting made Lucifer realize he wouldn't be in the God's realm for a while. That's when it hit Lucifer, realizing the time has come to act. This was his chance. a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity to finally get his revenge. There was no way he was going to miss it. Without any warning and determined to get rid of the one obstacle standing between him and Mu, Lucifer suddenly used his life taxidermy spell. As the spell activated, sharp purple lightning bolts, shaped like spears, appeared above the dragonling. But the dragonling's sharp senses didn't fail him. Not one to be caught off guard, he leaped back just in time, dodging every single spear-like attack in less than the blink of an eye. His previously awkward and ashamed expression quickly shifted to one of seriousness and readiness for battle. With a firm voice, he demanded an explanation. What's the meaning of this? He asked sharply. His eyes glowed with intensity as he pressed further, seeking confirmation. Lucifer, are you seriously declaring war against Mu, the god of earth? Are you serious? Lucifer, now filled with confidence, knowing Mu wasn't around to interfere, floated slowly in midair. Then, with a booming voice, he declared that he would personally expel Mu from the seat of divinity. He knew exactly what those words meant, and he didn't hesitate to confirm it. It was an official declaration of war. The dragonling didn't waste any time. Without hesitation, he compressed his fiery breath and unleashed a deadly blast of flames that looked more like a laser, shooting straight toward Lucifer. At first, it seemed like Lucifer was caught off guard by the sudden attack, but even without expecting it, he effortlessly dodged it with ease. Strangely, instead of dissipating, the dragon's attack spun around the god's planet-like realm and exploded violently on the far side of it. The explosion was massive, so intense that the archer god had to quickly conjure a magical shield. First, he used it to protect himself, then extended it to shield the other gods attending the meeting. Unlike the others, Lucifer didn't flinch. He didn't move a muscle, not to run, not to shield himself, nothing. The waves and flames from the explosion, like the aftermath of a nuclear blast, soon reached the meeting, roaring toward them with unstoppable force. As expected from the gods, neither Lucifer or the dragonling, nor anyone else took any damage. Realizing his first deadly attack had been completely useless against Lucifer, the dragonling decided to use his ultimate move, Polymorph Release. The moment he activated it, his entire body began to transform. Not just his arms and legs, but every part of him started expanding. Wild red lightning crackled around him, and a fierce aura surrounded the dragon, making it clear just how serious he was about protecting his master. But even after such a legendary transformation, Lucifer wasn't the least bit impressed. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The demon god smirked and announced confidently, "I'll deal with you as Mu's little girl easily. Then, it'll be Mu's turn to pay for what he did to me." The dragon, however, had no intention of letting that happen. He was fully committed to defending his master, no matter what it cost him. But things didn't go as the dragon had planned. Mu's royal assistant was easily defeated by Lucifer, unable to even leave a scratch on him. His entire body was trapped in Lucifer's life taxidermy spell, leaving him immobile and badly injured. The archer god let out a sigh and decided to leave, casually stating that the atmosphere here wasn't suitable anymore for a proper godly meeting. Everyone else, however, was left frozen in shock, stunned by the aftermath of the battle between Lucifer and the dragonling. They were too scared to make a move, let alone help either side. The archer god's departure didn't escape Lucifer's notice. Suddenly, Lucifer called out to him and, with a piercing side glance, demanded to know whose side he was on, whether he supported the expulsion or opposed it. The archer god, however, just kept floating away, casually responding that he was neutral, neither supporting nor opposing. Lucifer didn't like the answer, but he made it clear he was fine with it, as long as the archer god didn't interfere. Then, turning to the rest of the gods, Lucifer coldly asked if anyone objected to Mu's expulsion. But after witnessing the dragonling's state, someone as powerful as a god utterly defeated, none of them dared to speak up. Meanwhile, the dragon was still alive, and tried to warn Lucifer, reminding him that he was no match for God Mu. But Lucifer just smirked and responded with a chilling revelation. He knew that Mu wasn't here and was instead living in a weak, pathetic human body on Earth. The dragonling was stunned. He hadn't expected Lucifer to know this secret, especially since he thought he was the only one aware of it. And in that moment, everything started to click. It all made sense now, why Lucifer had suddenly decided to rebel against Mu. Lucifer, however, didn't admit that he'd learned the secret by spying on God Mu. Instead, he shifted the blame onto the dragon, claiming that his overconfidence in his strength and lack of vigilance had given Lucifer the opportunity to figure it out. The dragonling couldn't stand to hear such disrespectful words. With no other options left, he decided to make one last desperate attempt to stop Lucifer. Using his massive tail, he launched a surprise attack, hoping to catch Lucifer off guard. But once again, things didn't go as he planned. Lucifer remained perfectly still, pretending not to notice until the very last second. Then, with precision and ease, he dodged the attack and slashed through the dragon's tail with a magical weapon. Whether it was a spear or a sword, it didn't even matter. Lucifer's power was undeniable. The poor dragon's tail was cut into several pieces, and there was a reason Lucifer didn't just finish him off. He knew that as long as Mu's assistant was alive, he could use him to find Mu on Earth. The thought of confronting him in that weak human body and making him suffer after all the humiliations Lucifer had endured filled him with satisfaction. His devilish laughter echoed in the air, while the dragonling coughed up blood repeatedly, his body trembling and powerless to do anything to stop Lucifer. Later that day on Earth, things weren't looking much better for Hyung. Covered in wounds, he was getting harshly scolded by his coach for getting into a street fight. To make things worse, he was being forced to take a long recovery break right before his important matches. After the lecture, his coach finally dismissed him, and as Hyung made his way out of the gym, he couldn't help but mentally blame Lee for the mess he was in. Just as he reached the exit door, Kang walked into the gym, leaving the two of them awkwardly face to face. Kang immediately noticed Hyung's beaten-up appearance and sour mood. Without hesitation, he asked what had happened to him and his hand. Hyung, feeling embarrassed, couldn't bring himself to admit that he'd been beaten by some random, weak-looking guy. Knowing that Kang was one of the best boxers in the country, a sneaky idea popped into Hyung's head. He lowered his bruised face, putting on a shameful and sad expression, and started lying about what had happened. To make it more convincing, he even forced himself to cry, letting tears fall onto the floor as he explained how he had stepped in to help his brother who was being bullied, only to have the bullies gang up on him and beat him mercilessly. He really went all out, crying like a little kid and covering his face, trying to look like an innocent victim who was just trying to do the right thing. To Hyung's surprise, Kang didn't seem moved at all. He simply ignored the tears and walked past him, casually reminding Hyung that he had no one to blame but himself. Kang told him he needed to be more careful, especially before his competitions, and walked away without another word. Seeing his plan fail, and with Kang now out of sight, Hyung immediately stopped crying, his face shifting to one of disappointment. But just as he turned to leave, he froze when Kang suddenly called out, "By the way!" For a moment, Hyung panicked, thinking Kang had seen right through him and realized the whole thing was a fake act. But to his surprise, it was the complete opposite. Kang actually believed him, and was now asking for the name of the person who had done this to him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Mu was still sitting on Lee's dirty bed. He couldn't stop thinking about why he couldn't return to his original body, his frustration and confusion growing by the second. Based on his divine knowledge and of course his experience, there could only be one reason why he wasn't able to return. It had to be that his body was seriously damaged. Even this reason didn't sit right with Mu. He was convinced that not only was a dragonling, someone as strong as a god, protecting him, but his godly body wasn't something that could be easily harmed. His eyes widened in shock as the realization hit him. He pieced the whole incident together and thought, what if all the gods joined forces to attack me? That seemed to make the most sense. He suddenly jumped out of the bed, panicked. If his theory was right, he didn't have time to waste. He needed to act fast. But try as he might, he couldn't think of anything to do, and that only made him angrier. Frustrated, he punched Lee's pillow to release his anger. The thought that things could spiral out of control if he didn't return to his body made him feel even worse. The idea that those gods, who wouldn't dare face him one-on-one, were now cowardly taking advantage of his situation was unbearable. Unable to hold back his fury, Mu started punching the bed and the pillow repeatedly. In his mind, he wished for just one chance to turn the tables and teach all those cowardly gods a lesson. If he got that chance, he vowed to make stew out of the lot of them. Finally, after a few minutes of messing around, he got tired and stopped punching. He realized it was better to calm down and think things through. He reminded himself that the dragonling, his protector, wasn't someone who'd go down easily, even if all the gods teamed up against him. That thought helped God Mu calm down a little. He started to think, if I can't do anything about my original body right now, I might as well focus on this one. At least it'll give me a better chance of staying alive. With that in mind, he headed back to the training area. This time he was putting his full effort into strengthening the rest of his body, ignoring his arm muscles for the moment. Training his abdominal muscles for the first time made Mu feel like they were